Hey guys, welcome to today's video in which I'm going to read out the letter that Boris Johnson sent to Theresa May to resign, and Theresa May's response. We're going to try and read between the lines because there's some really interesting things you can pick out from this letter. Okay, so we'll start with Boris Johnson's resignation letter to Theresa May. So, Boris writes, "Dear Theresa, it is more than 2 years since the British people who voted to leave the European Union on an ambiguous and categorical promise that if they do so, they would be taking back control of their democracy." Obviously, he feels that Theresa May is being too autonomous. I've talked about this before on my channel. Do you want a Prime Minister that's more autonomous, or do you want a Prime Minister that's more democratic and more kind of like, hey guys, what do you think of me? So he goes on, "They were told that they would be able to manage their own immigration policy, repatriate the sums of UK cash currently spent by the EU, and above all, that they would be able to pass laws independently, and in the interests of people in this country." So, for whatever reason, he thinks this deal at Chequers is not gonna give us any of that. He goes on, "Brexit should be about opportunity and hope." Yes, I agree about that. "It should be a chance to do things differently, to be more nimble and dynamic, and to maximise the particular advantages of the UK as an open, outward-looking global economy. That dream is dying, suffocated by needless self-doubt." Ooh. Got it right in the stinger there, Boris. Okay, we have postponed crucial decisions. So in other words, they have left out crucial decisions on Brexit, which is, again, very damning, including the preparations for a no deal. So they have not prepared for a no deal. There is no alternate no deal preparation. In other words, we're probably not going to get a no deal. Even though they said that we might have a no deal, we're probably not going to get one. And him writing this means that the EU can now think, oh, hang on, you haven't prepared for a no deal, so we can take what we want now. But nevertheless, as I argued in my letter to you of last November, with the result that we appear to be heading for a semi-Brexit, with large parts of the economy still locked in the EU system, but with no UK control over that system. It now seems that the opening bid of our negotiations involves accepting that we are not actually going to be able to make our own laws. Indeed, we seem to have gone backwards since the last Chequers meeting in February, when I described my frustration as Mayor of London in trying to protect cyclists from juggernauts. Obviously, Boris cares a lot about cyclists, so we've seen him cycling a lot as London Mayor. He's focused this argument on his cyclists, but it could be relayed to other arguments. But basically, he goes on to describe juggernauts. So we had wanted to lower the cabin windows to improve visibility, and even though such designs were already on the market, and even though there had been a horrific spate of deaths, many female cyclists, we were told that we had to wait for EU to legislate on the matter. So basically he's saying that the EU is blocking our chance to make our own laws for ourselves, whatever the reason. So at the previous Chequers session, we thrashed out an elaborate procedure for divergence from EU rules, but even that now seems to have been taken off the table, and there is in fact no easy UK right of initiative. Yet if Brexit is to mean anything, it must surely give ministers and Parliament a chance to do things differently to protect the public. If a country cannot pass a law to save the lives of female cyclists when that proposal is suspended at every level of UK government, then I don't see how when that proposal is supported at every level at UK government, then I don't see how that country can truly be called independent. And I think he's right. So he's obviously afraid that we're not going to be able to pass our own laws. And whether he's doing this for kind of political gain, and it's all just rhetoric, and he wants to make Theresa May look bad and the whole negotiations look bad, because we don't really know the specific details of what actually they found out until Thursday. We don't know. So conversely, the British government has spent decades arguing against this or that EU directive. But he could be, obviously, giving us an insight here into actual Theresa May's thinking. I'll get onto the reply in a minute, because that's even more insightful. On the grounds that it was too burdensome or ill thought out, we are now in the ludicrous position of asserting that we must accept huge amounts of precisely such EU law without changing an iota, because it is essential for our economic health, and when we no longer have any ability to influence these laws as they are made. In that respect, we are truly headed for the status of colony. That was the damning blow that the media reported. And many will struggle to see the economic or political advantages of that particular arrangement. It is also clear that by surrendering control over our rulebook for goods and agri-foods and much else besides, we will make it much more difficult to do free trade deals. So she's trying to make a free trade area, and he's worried that that would mean that we wouldn't be able to then make deals beyond the European Union, so for example in America or China, so without the consent of the EU. And obviously, don't forget that Theresa May's bid was a starting bid, so he feels like the EU could take more of that away for themselves, and it's not a very good starting bid for the negotiations. Obviously it's a starting bid as well. It takes this till now to get to this point, and they're still not happy with it, and we're not far from the end. So, and then there is further impediment of having to argue for an impractical and undeliverable customs arrangement unlike any other in existence. What is even more disturbing is that this is our opening bid. I go on there. I've just said about this. This is already how we see the end state for the UK before the other side has made its counteroffer. It is as though we are sending our vanguard into battle with the white flags fluttering above them. Indeed, I was concerned looking at Friday's document that there might be further concessions on immigration, although we might end up effectively paying for access to the single market. So if we end up paying for access to the single market, that would be the worst thing for Brexit, because it would mean the economic benefit of being outside the European Union would be lost. So, I mean, Theresa May has promised to take us out of the single market, but she wants like a new, weird, cool deal with the EU, and he's worried that they're going to say, no, if you want access to the single market, you've got to pay for it. So on Friday, I acknowledged that my side of the argument were too few to prevail, and congratulated you on at least reaching a cabinet decision on the way forward. As I said then, the government now has a song to sing. The trouble is that I have practiced the words over the weekend and find that they stick in the throat. So in other words, the cabinet has to say whatever the Prime Minister thinks is right, and repeat it and sell the Prime Minister, make the Prime Minister seem like God, and he can't do that anymore if she's not supporting, essentially not this, going in this free trade area and getting access to the single market if we have to pay for it. We must have collective responsibility, since I cannot in all conscience champion these proposals. I have sadly concluded that I must go. And then he goes on to thank various people who he's worked with as his time Foreign Secretary and London Mayor. So then we get on to Theresa May's response. This is very insightful about what kind of Prime Minister we have behind the scenes. She's very different behind the scenes to what she is in person. Even though this is a public letter, it gives a bit of insight as to how autonomous she really is, and how much she doesn't seem to listen to her own cabinet, probably for various reasons, because she's actually quite a weak Prime Minister. So she says, "Thank you for your letter relinquishing the office of Secretary of State for Foreign Countries. I'm sorry and a little surprised to have received it after the productive discussions we had at Chequers on Friday." So she's basically saying, hey, we had a productive discussion and you're doing this for a political game. And the comprehensive and detailed proposals which we agreed as a cabinet. It is as proposals which will honour the result of the referendum and the commitments we made in our general election manifesto to leave the single market and customs union. Yes, Theresa, but you didn't win that election, did you? You've got a hung parliament and you're now in a coalition with the DUP. So that means that any manifesto that you had at that election is now compromised, and therefore you must accept that compromise in order to be a good Prime Minister. But you're not accepting that compromise because you're being too autonomous in this case. It will mean that we take back control of our borders, our laws and our money. These are just words, Theresa. These are just statements that you've said in speeches time and time again, in which you have said these words: take back control, borders, laws, money, whatever. And they don't mean anything unless you present sizable actions and policies that make them possible. Ending free movement of people. Yes, I agree with that. Ending the jurisdiction of the European Court. I agree with all of these, but if you're not actually going to do it, it doesn't count. And ending the days of sending vast sums of tax and money to the European Union. But if you're going to pay for the single market, then it doesn't make any sense to leave the European Union anyway. And if you're going to have their control our laws and stuff, it doesn't make any sense. We will be able to spend that money on our priorities instead, such as 20 billion to increase the NHS budget. But you've now got Jeremy Hunt as your Foreign Secretary, the guy that messed up the NHS anyway, which means that we will soon be spending an extra 394 million a week on the National Health Service. Yeah, great, but at the end of the day, if we don't get the Brexit trade deal that we want, we won't be able to make money beyond that. We will just be able to leave the European Union and get the money from leaving. So, as I outlined at Chequers, the agreement we reach requires the full collective support of Her Majesty's government. So basically he's saying, because you don't support me, you're out. She's got to remember that she didn't win the election. And, you know, she has to have the support of her cabinet. And if she doesn't have the support of her cabinet, she has to change them, which is what she's done. So she can now manipulate people and say, well, you need me in office, I'm better than Corbyn, you don't want to stop Brexit negotiations, so whatever I say goes. But the thing she doesn't realise is that it's massively toxic to her own party and to the wealth and the health of the country if she does that. Because it will leave us without a party to vote. Well, I guess you could vote for Corbyn, but even there's plenty of people that don't want Corbyn in power, and it's not healthy for Brexit either, because it means that the democracy that we voted for in the Brexit referendum, they're taking back control, they're taking back for the people, is now gone. To the Prime Minister, who, let's face it, was in there because she wasn't voted for, is now in there because she didn't win an election, even though she has the most majority. She doesn't have a majority, but she has the most MPs in Parliament. She's just there because she's there, because there's nobody better to replace her. So during the EU referendum campaign, collective responsibility on EU policy was temporarily suspended. So she's basically saying during the referendum, all the MPs and all the cabinet members could say what they like and have their own opinion. And because she stayed quiet, she wins. She played the chess game, she stood out, and she managed to take it to penalties and win the penalties. But Boris didn't. He played forthright. He did the speech about leaving, and because of that, he can't any longer have an opinion. in the same way Remainers can't have an opinion. Which I agree with to an extent. If you're a Remainer and you lost that Brexit vote, then fine. But the type of Brexit we get and the amount in which we stay in the customs union and single market should be contested, because I believe that the British people voted to leave the things that come with being part of the EU, and if we don't go out of those things, then it's not the same as what people voted for in Brexit. So it's not democratic. It's not taking back control. So as we developed our policy on Brexit, so she formed a government, she developed their policy on Brexit. I've allowed cabinet colleagues considerable latitude to express their individual views. But the thing is, to express their individual views, Theresa May appointed 75% Remain cabinet. Okay, there has to be something said about the Prime Minister who does that. And if she's doing that, the Tories need to realise that their success in the next election relies on them being able to deliver Brexit. And if they don't deliver Brexit, then they will be voting out and they will be kept out of Parliament for a long time. So there needs to be some Brexiteers, at least 50% of Brexiteers in the cabinet. Now, I'm not saying that we need to change the Prime Minister, but we need to make sure that there's at least a good enough representation of Brexiteers in Parliament. Because at the moment, there's mainly Remainers in Parliament, and things aren't getting done in the way that the public agree with. So I've allowed cabinet colleagues considerable latitude to express their individuals. I've said that. But the agreement we reached on Friday marks the point where that is no longer the case. But because you've had this meeting, we can't no longer have an opinion or can't no longer debate the case. And if you are not able to provide the support we need to secure this deal in the interest of the United Kingdom, it is right that you should step down. So in other words, you don't like it, you don't like me, go away. She goes on to thank him then for his time as Conservative Mayor. So, yeah, this gives an insight that Theresa May is very authoritarian. She doesn't listen. She doesn't take into account people's opinion. She thinks that, because the debate's over, we therefore can't fight for the kind of Brexit that we want. And that's not the case. She thinks that because the referendum's over, because Remainers are told to shut up, therefore Brexiteers have to be told to shut up. You have to remember that Remain is lost. She's a Remainer, don't forget. She's got, over 75% of Remainers in her cabinet now. And she's basically saying, if you don't agree with me, don't be in my government. But at the end of the day, this is a democracy. We live in a democratic country, and we need a Prime Minister that has to agree with the majority of people in Parliament and a cabinet and the entire country. And she didn't win an election. So I'd like to know your guys' opinion on this, because this really gets to me. Gives a massive insight into what Theresa May is really like. Join in the debate below and subscribe. I'll see you next time.